America is in countries that don't necessarily want it there and don't necessarily need it to be there. One of those countries is Syria. Russia works in association with Iran and works in association with Syria. And if it wasn't for Russia and Iran basically helping Syria from terrorists that the United States and the money that the US was funneling and dumping into that country, trying to undermine that country would have been a basket case. Look at Libya, where they're selling black slaves. Look at what happened to Iraq. Look at what happened to Afghanistan. Basically, we set fires around the globe. And if it wasn't for grim determination by Bashar al-Assad to stay in that seat, and Russia given assistance, they would have collapsed. The fate of Libya would have most likely been the fate of Syria. And ISIS would have been able to control a large swath of land. Now, the U.S. was doing this with this kind of association with the Kurds, but we even sold out the Kurds, leaving them basically at the whim of either Turkey or, for that matter, Syria. While in Syria, the U.S. is left like a small force, but basically we left enough in order to steal the oil, burn the crops, and work with the terrorists in the region to basically maintain control of the oil that we stole. Now, keep in mind, Syria is not necessarily a big oil producer. The oil is basically used for domestic consumption. So stealing the oil deprives and robs that country of the ability for energy production. Destroying the wheat pushes that country into famine. All of this was done to try to get Bashar al-Assad to knuckle under and to remove him from power. It didn't work. The rapists, the terrorists, the ripping the country, the fires, the destruction, all of those things, 500,000 people dead as a result of our actions in that country and provoking and pushing that civil war, adding weapons and fuel and cash to make it that much worse. Right now, Russia is welcome in Syria, obvious reasons. The United States is not. This took place, I think it was a month or 2 months ago, but it was relatively recent. This is a Russian and U.S. military vehicle in the same area. And look what happens. I'd call this funny if it wasn't for the fact that these guys are running around with huge weapons, can shoot, can kill. I'm pretty sure they have people in the vehicle that could get out and do the exact same thing. These are nuclear power nations that are basically ramming one another. I don't particularly care whose fault it was. And on some level, this could be one of those things of hazing or this thing of like rubbing against your opponent without necessarily going so far as it will cause any kind of altercation. But basically, with all of these forces and all of these countries in a small area, potential for problems can occur. Mike Pompeo joked at one point that the United States had killed hundreds of Russians. Think about that. Now, when Pompeo made that joke, this is one of those things where it may be true, but this is not something that Vladimir Putin and Russia would ever raise up because they don't necessarily want to deal with the political fallout of having to acknowledge and respond to that. That has consequences. But Pompeo joking about it is somewhat problematic, especially since the United States is uninvited, has basically invaded a country that doesn't want it there, doesn't need it there, especially for the explicit purpose or stated purpose that the United States is there for. And at this point, it's just an invading nation that is committing war crimes in the theft of oil, or for that matter, the destruction of crops. Something else is happening similar to this, not in Syria. And another place that the United States has no justification to be, you have a ship, a destroyer, in what they call freedom of navigation assignments. Now, freedom of navigation assignments are basically political casting. I hope you understand what that means. The United States is given a propagandistic term to try to explain their actions. Media, who looks at this stuff through the framing of the U.S. government accepts that framing of freedom of navigation. So when they say it, it makes it look as if, well, the United States is just ensuring that people can move freely. Leave no child behind. Well, they're just trying to ensure that all of the kids are. It's naming, but the naming is not necessarily indicative of the act. Often the time, the naming is just there to obfuscate the actual intentions, especially when the naming can be opposite of what is actually taking place. I want to show you a warship of Russia chasing off a ship of the United States that went into territory that it did not belong and has no claim to. It's fair to say that the area is disputed territory. It's called the Sea of Japan, but again, even that is up for grabs or contentious depending upon where you are. This is kind of like Nagorno-Karabakh versus the other, what is it, Ashk. Well, nobody calls it that. The only people who call it that were the Armenians who were there. In real terms, the rest of the world considers it Nagorno-Karabakh. Same thing here. The people who live in the various countries may give it a particular denomination, a particular name. However, what it's called from the standpoint of the West is the Sea of Japan, but this is contested waters. North Korea, Japan, Russia, all of these countries basically border this particular body of water. It is not on the border of Kansas. It is not on the border of Florida or California. We have nothing to do with it. And the freedom of navigation is provocative. It's provocative when it's done for North Korea. It's provocative here also when it's done against Russia. Russia wasn't having it, and that U.S. boat was basically chased out with its tail between its legs. John McCain ran faster, probably, than John McCain has ever ran in his life. Welcome. Oh, by the way, that's the name of the boat. To the soapbox. My name is Jamarl Thomas. This is the Progressive Soapbox. Guys, if you dig this content, please like, share, and subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. This content is brought to you by you, and I appreciate you the opportunity for allowing me to do this. So, this is the Sea of Japan, as it's called. Google Maps, right here, Sea of Japan. Now, I want you to notice something. This is not on the border of California. This is not on the border of Florida. We don't own Japan. We don't own North Korea. We don't own South Korea. And we damn sure don't own Russia. Now, the United States sends a warship into the Sea of Japan. Again, an area that is under dispute and an area that the United States does not have any claim to. Russia does have claim, or at the very least, is one of the participants that disputes this particular territory. And with that dispute, they have the military capacity to enforce that particular dispute. The United States, John McCain, goes through in a quote-unquote freedom of navigation movements. Now, you've heard this before. You often hear this in the South China Sea, where the United States were doing freedom of navigation movements and basically daring China to do something about it. In this very specific case, Russia actually does have a military, and that military will defend what it considers to be its territory, its mission, whether that's in Syria or whether that's in the Sea of Japan. We would do the exact same thing if we claimed a particular area as ours or that was in dispute. You don't believe that the United States will guard what waters that it considered to be its waters, even if it was in dispute? Of course it would. Of course it would. A Russian warship chased the U.S. Navy destroyer from the waters in the Sea of Japan on Tuesday, the Kremlin said. This is the latest string of close contacts between Russian and American forces across the globe. Well, I've already shown you the issue with Syria. Also, look, Vladimir Putin has been a statesman over the course of the last several years. And this is, in some degree, takes advantage of the United States' intransigence. The United States has been all over the place. can't deal with the COVID crisis, income inequality through the roof, civil strife from the standpoint of groups fighting in the streets, setting police stations on fire, floods, fires. There seems to be a complete inability and breakdown of the political space to be able to deal with the most common and basic of problems. On the other hand, this allows political opportunity for other countries around the world, China dumping huge money into the Belt and Road Initiative, something that's going to pay back massive dividends from an economic benefit, from a structural benefit in regards to building and infrastructure, but also in political associations with the various countries to which they are going to be working through. The trade deal that China passed, again, is going to be a major boom, sewing up massive amounts of the world trades and undermining the attempts of the United States and Western powers to delegitimize or undermine that country's economic output. Militarily, again, this is also something that's going to grow. Russia has been selling its weapons across the world. Vladimir Putin has been a statesman, putting in troops and dealing with peace from standpoint of, if you remember, getting rid of the Syria weapons, the chemical weapons, and preventing Obama or a war there. Nagorno-Karabakh and the peace deal that was made between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Yes, Armenia was broken and beaten at that point, and so that made the deal that much easier, but Russia had put that deal out prior, trying to bring these guys together. I'm making the point that in the very specific instance, other countries have behaved rationally, where it seems that the U.S. has been a basket case. It's our own fault. Don't misunderstand me. I guess I'm just making the point that this is not necessarily true everywhere around the globe. Other countries have been able to succeed off of our incompetence. Call it what it is. Certainly, I would love to give this kind of aspirational, we're going to the moon type stuff. But in real terms, we have 254,000 people dead. And we're going to spend like $1 trillion on the military while not necessarily having the resources to even deal with the most basic of things. Yes, COVID was bad. No, it didn't have to be this bad. Yes, it's embarrassing not having the supplies. Yes, it's embarrassing where you're going to give these massive tax cuts while putting that on the poor to pay for the rich and their tax cuts. And yet, when it comes down to it, brass tacks, and something happens, you have the complete lack, A, empathy, but B, competence to even deal with that particular issue. Right now, I showed you the issue that was in Syria, and the U.S. send ships brazenly into contested waters. The U.S. military officially responded saying the destroyer, the ISL, the USS John McCain, had been conducting a freedom of navigation operation in the Peter the Great Gulf, the largest gulf in the Sea of Japan. The United States and Russia have long disagreed about Moscow's claim over this area. Moscow, Russia, claims it. The United States, just to be clear, is nowhere near it. Show me in this map where the United States is located. Nowhere. Nowhere. I can see Japan getting a claim and disputing it. I can see North Korea getting a claim and disputing it. I can see South Korea disputing Russia's claim. The United States is on the other side of the globe, and yet they believe that they should have some claim or some input over here. The premise is ludicrous. It's ludicrous on its face. So, Russia officials have stated, now the American destroyer basically went 2 kilometers, 1.2 miles past the border. And this was at 6 in the morning. Now, a Russian vessel, the Admiral, Vinogradov. The Admiral Vinogradov. Now, the ship warned, the foreign ship, basically the American ship, the USS John McCain, that it was going to be rammed. Basically said, you either leave or we are going to ram you. Choose. Well, good sense prevailed, and John McCain changed his course and left the area pretty much immediately with the Russian vessel in its tracks. Now, The Russian Defense Ministry is basically saying this. America basically is corroborating this particular story in regards to what took place. The United States 7th Fleet issued a statement that said the McCain had operated in accordance with international law and that Russia had in 1984 illegally claimed the area as, quote, internal waters. A country can claim anything. At that point, it's under dispute. The United States claimed that Juan Guaido won an election when like 2% or 5% of the population even know who the guy is, so it was. I'm making a point that claims are ubiquitous, and those claims can be hashed out among the players that are involved in that claim. There are times where powers get involved where they claim they can blow off the other ones, but the U.S. does the same thing. They have nothing to do with us. We've instigated ourselves around the world, and when other countries invite powers in to benefit those internal countries, well, we balk. In this case, the freedom of navigation thing is entirely propaganda. If there needs to be some settlement for these waters, then work in that tandem. Come to some kind of agreement on that front. But other countries that basically say this is international waters is no different than Russia saying it's not. Both are points of view. And both of those points of view, in some degree, needed to be meted out. The United States taking the perspective of one and saying that other one is not accepted doesn't really get you anywhere. And the same way that Russia can claim it, another country can say they can claim it. It's a dispute, right? That's the entire point of a dispute. Yes, you can err on the side of one particular point of view and say, we don't accept the Russians' point of view. But it's neither here nor there when the Russians can turn around and say, I don't accept yours. I'm making the point that the freedom of navigation movement is just a propaganda trick. It's just a language in order to describe something and give this kind of false information in regards to what is taking place and what it is. Look, this is dangerous. It's dangerous, right? What happens if that ship got rammed? What happens if American soldiers died in the process of that ship being rammed? What happened if Russian soldiers died? What happened if the American ship fired on the Russian ship? Fact of the matter is, the American ship shouldn't have been there in the first place. And the implications or the conflict that takes place, again, this need to be meted out through diplomacy. And this brinksmanship that puts these guys at the barrel of a gun. People sleepwalk into wars. And mistakes happen. And in those mistakes happening, escalation can occur. This is not funny. This is dangerous. I'll leave it here. Like, share, and of course, subscribe. Thanks all.